When the humans arrived, they didn't walk into the Galactic Council chambers with fanfare or flags, they didn't bow, speak, or even breathe audibly. They stood still, tall, silent, cloaked in featureless armor that shimmered like shadow and light fighting over steel. No faces, no eyes, just the unmistakable sense that something new had entered the room, a something no one could read, categorize, or intimidate. The delegates of the galaxy's most powerful empires didn't know it yet, but in that moment, everything had changed. At first, the facelessness was seen as a weakness, a primitive culture still gripped by fear, unable to engage in the open traditions of diplomacy. Surely, they thought, this young species must still be clinging to ancient tribal insecurities. What kind of race refuses to show their face in a room where transparency and social signaling are everything? In most galactic cultures, hiding one's face was a declaration of dishonor or deception. Among the Ashkareth, it was grounds for diplomatic disqualification. Among the Jaxari, it was a crime. But the humans didn't care about expectations. They didn't flinch, didn't explain, didn't apologize. They stood there, perfectly still, unmoving and unreadable. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't submission. It was something else entirely, intent. And it made everyone in that room deeply uncomfortable. A hologram flickered across the chamber walls. The delegates reviewed Earth-Stati, its wars, its history, its volatile species diversity. They saw a fractured world that had somehow reached Type 1 civilization status in record time. Too fast, unsettlingly fast. And now, here they were. No faces, no emotions, no leader stepping forward. Just 6 identical human silhouettes, each one pulsing with unreadable tech, radiating silence like a storm cloud ready to break. The Arvadi ambassador, a crystalline being of immense pride, attempted the greeting ritual words of welcome in 77 languages. The humans didn't respond. The ambassador tried again, this time offering symbolic gifts from his planet's sacred vaults. No reaction. The humans didn't speak, they didn't move. It was as if they were waiting for something no one else in the room understood. Behind closed doors, jokes were made. Maybe they lost their mouths. Maybe they're afraid of germs. Maybe it's just one human projecting 6 bodies. The laughter masked something no one dared admit. The fear of the unknown. Because while the galaxy had encountered hostile species before, this was different. Hostility they could handle. But the humans weren't aggressive. They weren't passive. They were perfectly neutral. And that terrified everyone more than any battle fleet ever had. The galactic intelligence networks were put on high alert. Surveillance drones buzzed Earth's orbital platforms. Quantum scans attempted to decode the armor. No results. The tech resisted categorization and no heat signatures. No energy outputs. No digital resonance. It was as if the humans had stepped out of a dimension the rest of the galaxy hadn't even discovered yet. That night, across dozens of star systems, thousands of analysts worked to determine the meaning behind the faceless masks. Was it a bluff, a way to mask genetic inferiority, a defense mechanism, a cultural quirk, or something worse? A strategic signal that humanity wasn't here to participate in the galaxy's game as broken bar but to change them. Every other species that had joined the council had tried to fit in, had tried to be liked, but humans arrived without identity, without personality, without ego. No politician seeking votes, no emperor demanding tribute, no overlord speaking in perfect logic, just stillness, just silence, just the unbearable weight of unreadability. For the galaxy, this was new. It had no protocol for this. Every ambassador, diplomat, and manipulator in the room had evolved in cultures where the face was everything. You could read intention in a blink, weakness in a twitch, lies in a grin. But these humans had erased all of that from the conversation. You couldn't negotiate with someone whose face you couldn't see. You couldn't threaten someone who wouldn't react. Days passed. Meetings stalled. The humans never left the chamber. They stood without food, without sleep, without explanation. Rumors spread. Maybe they were machines. Maybe they didn't need rest. Maybe they were transmitting everything back to Earth through a method too advanced for interception. Maybe they were watching everyone else fall apart under their own assumptions. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying realization of all. The humans didn't come to be understood. They came to observe how the galaxy would reveal itself in their presence. They knew the others would show their true natures when faced with the unknown. And they were right. Behind every smile from the Dranxy envoy was a flicker of fear. Behind every curious question from the Velarii was a strategy being rewritten. And behind every mocking comment from the media was a nervous glance at the data feeds, just in case the humans suddenly moved. But they didn't. Not yet. And that patience combined with that facelessness became their first true weapon. Because in a galaxy built on appearances, the only species that came without only a broken bar was instantly in control. The whispers started the moment the humans left the chamber, still silent, still unreadable, still faceless. As soon as the great doors sealed behind them, the laughter began, nervous at first, then louder, more performative. The Galactic Council, made up of over 400 member species, scoffed in unison. "This is humanity?" someone muttered. "A primitive world, too scared to show its face." In the following days, alien talks, fears and galactic news streams were flooded with satire. Animated shorts showed humans tripping over their own armor. Merchants sold novelty masks labeled Earth Elite Edition. The Velarii diplomatic corps created a meme of a human envoy holding a mirror to its helmet, trying to remember what it looked like. One Jigsaw comedian got a standing ovation across 8 planets for the line, "If I wanted to talk to a wall, I'd go home to my ex-mate." The sentiment was clear: humanity was a joke, a young, unstable species pretending to be mysterious to cover for its inadequacy. Their silence, immaturity, their facelessness, a cheap intimidation tactic. Their stillness, obvious proof of robotic dependence. The older species saw themselves as superior, evolved, cultured. Earth was, to them, the equivalent of a child dressing up in a warlord's armor, amusing at best, irritating at worst. Council analysts ran reports dissecting the psychology of the human performance. One labeled it a species-wide inferiority complex. Another warned of emotionally stunted militarism. Across strategic circles, Earth's envoys were dismissed as an irrelevant threat. They had no allies, no colonial holdings, no access to wormhole transit routes. "Let them act mysterious," said the Archon of Serac 9. "It won't change the fact that they have no real power." Military briefings turned the humans into cautionary footnotes. Simulations showed that in any direct confrontation with seasoned galactic powers, Earth would be overwhelmed in under 48 hours. "They haven't even weaponized gravity yet," one Velarii commander scoffed. "Their biggest bombs still rely on combustion physics." Adorable. But behind all the laughter and mockery was something no one wanted to admit: discomfort. Because even though every news anchor and ambassador tried to play it cool, deep down, they all remembered that moment in the chamber. The silence, the motionless figures, the feeling that something ancient had entered their future. Something that wasn't interested in fitting in, playing by the rules, or even explaining itself. And then came the footage. A low-resolution leak from a pirate drone hovering near the neutral zone. It captured a moment during an unauthorized border incursion, a minor alien skirmish involving a private fleet testing Earth's response time. The video showed what happened when the fleet approached. No warnings, no signals, just 6 human ships appearing instantly in formation like shadows folding out of the void. No engines, no flares, no build-up, just presence. The fleet's eye panicked. Targeting systems began locking onto each other. One command ship attempted to retreat, only to spin wildly into a field of gravitational distortion that didn't exist a second before. Within 73 seconds, the entire fleet was disabled and no shots fired. Just silence, and then a broken bar absence. The clip went viral within hours. Suddenly, the jokes stopped. The memes slowed. The Velarii commander who'd mocked combustion physics went off-grid. Military strategists requested updates to war game simulations. Trade guilds began rewriting their protocols for Earth interaction. In private meetings, ambassadors who had once scoffed began asking a different question: what if the faceless humans weren't bluffing? And yet, the public bravado remained. It had to. The Galactic Quarter was too old, too proud, too layered in bureaucracy to admit that it might have underestimated someone, least of all a species so new, so broken bar, emotionally unpredictable, Still, the most powerful diplomats and warlords began quietly adjusting their strategies. Maps were redrawn to avoid Earth-adjacent sectors. Fleet movements subtly curved around Sol, and more than one spy master began planting operatives, hoping to learn what lay behind those blank helmets. They wouldn't find much, because while the galaxy was busy laughing, humanity was watching, listening, learning. The facelessness had worked, but not just by intimidating. It had baited the galaxy into showing its true face. Proud, careless, arrogant, and humanity, behind the mirrors, was taking notes. They never had to speak. The laughter did all the talking for them. The galaxy expected resistance. It had seen rebellions, insurgencies, even desperate planetary last stands. But what it saw from Earth, the broken bar, was different. It wasn't resistance, it was precision. It was a calm storm. It was control without chaos. And it came from a species that never once took off its mask. The first engagement wasn't even supposed to be a battle. A test fleet from the core in Ascendancy was dispatched to pressure humanity into accepting economic compliance. He adjusted diplomatic nudged back with cruisers and energy lances. They entered the outer edge of Earth's influence without fanfare. But the moment their long-range sensors pinged Sol's outer defenses, something unusual happened. The signals bounced back, a broken bar distorted. They weren't jammed, they weren't blocked, they were mirrored, confused, rerouted. One commander joked that it was like shouting into a cave and hearing your own voice get angry in response. Then the lights began to die. One ship lost power, another suffered a cascading eye crash, a third exploded from the inside silently, cleanly, like its core had simply a broken bar stopped believing in physics. The entire core and fleet of 12 warships strong was gone in under 4 minutes. No visible attack, no human broadcast, no warning. The Council called it sabotage, the Corn called it witchcraft. Earth said nothing, and then it happened again. On the far edge of the Batari corridor, a border conflict between two minor trade guilds saw a neutral human ship caught in the crossfire. When the guilds refused to halt fire, a single faceless human vessel entered the fray. In under a minute, it disabled both fleets. It didn't destroy them. It didn't fire a single round. It just shut them down as systems dead, eye offline, crews unconscious but unharmed. Recovery drones later found every ship had been exposed to a low-level frequency that mimicked REM sleep and induced a neurochemical peace state. They hadn't been defeated, they'd been put to bed. That clip was leaked too. It went viral for all the wrong reasons. One moment, proud warrior races were threatening Earth. The next, their greatest champions were snoring in their command chairs. People stopped laughing. From that moment on, the galaxy watched every encounter closely, and they began to notice a pattern. Human forces never showed formation. Their ships didn't follow the usual geometric patterns of known militaries. No phalanxes, no flanking maneuvers. They moved like smoke through a collapsing room, unpredictable, adaptive, and always in sync. The most unsettling part, they never responded the same way twice. One skirmish might end in EMP bursts that caused enemy ships to rewrite their own mission codes. Another might be solved by holographic decoys that made entire fleets believe they'd jumped into a star. Sometimes, the humans didn't even show up in person. An alien assault fleet once arrived at Mars only to find their own homeworld's population watching it all happen. A broken bar live on their entertainment networks. Somehow, Earth had hijacked their signal, broadcasted the invasion to the attackers' citizens, and turned them against their own generals before a single laser was fired. Every encounter ended the same way, without faces, without names, and without failure. The galaxy didn't understand. How could this species, supposedly new to deep space warfare, be so precise, so inventive, so utterly unhittable? The truth was hard to admit, but it stared them down every time a battle began. Humanity was fighting with the logic the galaxy hadn't seen before, not because it was more advanced, but because it was entirely human. They fought emotionally, tactically, yes, but fueled by intuition, history, and unpredictability. No centralized eye, no bureaucratic chain of command, no outdated dogma, just instinct, bonded by some unseen current between every faceless fighter. No one ever saw a general, no one received ultimatums, no one was given a name to surrender to. The victories came like whispers through the void, silent, perfect, surgical, and through it all, Not a single mask was lifted. The faceless humans didn't need speeches or flags or demands. Every victory was a message, every battle was a lesson, and every silence was louder than any war cry the galaxy had ever known. Humanity didn't just fight without faces, they fought without fear, and that, more than any weapon or tactic, was what broke the galaxy's sense of control. The galaxy's spy networks were legendary, from molecular eavesdropping spores to sentient shadows that lived inside comms signals. There wasn't a species alive that could keep secrets from the Council's intelligence way until Earth. The moment humans entered the scene, the web frayed. Then it snapped. One by one, the galaxy's finest infiltration assets were lost, corrupted, or driven mad. It wasn't just failure, it was silencia dead where there should have been data, missing agents where there should have been reports. The first to go dark was a Velari Nero scout inserted into Earth's orbital network. She had survived assassination attempts, neural encryption burns, and even a time loop trap on Ether 6, but within 6 minutes of taping into Earth's data stream, she transmitted a single message: the signal is listening. Then nothing. She wasn't traced, she wasn't killed, she simply vanished. Next, the Corin sent an eye-spliced replicant of a human diplomat perfect in voice, movement, and DNA. It attended an Earth embassy, smiled, spoke, shook hands. It passed all scans. But on the third day, it walked out of the building, disassembled itself molecule by molecule on a public street, and left behind a handwritten note. They knew I was never real. The galaxy doubled down. Dozens of probes, mind crawlers, eye mimics, and nanite swarms were sent toward Earth. Not one returned intact. Some melted on entry into Earth's magnetosphere, as if the planet itself rejected them. Others transmitted warped signals distorted into loops of human lullabies or bursts of pure static shaped like brainwaves. One spy ship managed to get as far as Earth's moon before its captain sent a final log. I looked at their silence too long. Now it looks back. Still, the Council couldn't understand it. Humanity didn't have the most powerful weapons. Their history was chaotic, their political systems constantly shifting, their alliances fragile. But somehow, every attempt to extract their secrets ended in confusion or collapse. And it wasn't just spies failing, it was the systems designed to spy that began breaking down. Data crawlers got lost in loops when searching for Earth intelligence. One central archive on the galactic capital tried to map Earth's strategic protocols and ended up creating an elaborate romantic fanfiction about Earth's moon seducing Mars. It required a full memory purge and 8 planetary cycles of therapy. No one spoke of it again. The more the galaxy tried to understand Earth, the more Earth became a mirror reflecting confusion, emotion, and something else no one wanted to say out loud: exposure. Because unlike the calculated systems of the other species, Earth didn't defend its secrets with encryption. It defended them with unpredictability. One day, they transmit a Shakespeare play across interstellar channels. The next, they broadcast towers of static that turned out to be a hidden fractal encoding of human childhood memories. No message was ever direct, no pattern ever repeated. Their intelligence wasn't centralized, it was human, messy, unstructured, intuitive, and impossible to exploit. What terrified the Council wasn't just that their spies failed, it was that they couldn't even define what they were failing against. There were no secret codes, no master servers, no planetary eye to hijack. There was only a broken bar presence, a quiet, watching, interconnected world that had learned not to shout its secrets, but to feel them. Humanity wasn't just keeping its knowledge Scifi up, it was making sure the galaxy couldn't even ask the right questions. And maybe that was the point, because while the other species raced to extract intel from Earth, the humans never once tried to steal theirs. They didn't send probes, they didn't send operatives, they didn't even hack a single system. They didn't need to. They were already learning everything by watching how the galaxy treated and failed to learn about them. The greatest espionage network in the universe was brought to its knees not by brute force or counterintelligentsia broken bar but by silence. A silence that said, in its own way, we don't need to look inside your systems. You've already told us everything just by trying to look into ours. And that realization of the idea that the hunters had become the Wachita was the beginning of a new fear. A silent one, the kind that grows not from what you see, but from what refuses to be seen. And the faceless humans? They said nothing. They just kept watching. They searched for a leader. The galaxy always searched for a leader. Every species had only an emperor, a high mind, a ruling eye, a speaker for the collective. It was how the galaxy maintained order, made deals, threatened wars, brokered peace. You spoke to the top, and the rest followed. That was the system. That was the way. But with Earth the broken bar, there was no top, no central voice, no singular human standing above the others to claim authority. The council scoured every possible source. They analyzed transmissions, speeches, footage of Earth's ancient politicians. They tried to track orders, to follow command patterns in human military actions. But the more they searched, the more confused they became. One operation seemed led by a woman in her 60s with no military rank. Another saw tactical superiority achieved by what looked like a group of students coordinating remotely. Once, a relief fleet from Earth arrived at a collapsing space station and executed a flawless evacuation. When later asked who commanded the effort, every human on board answered with the same phrase: "We all did." It made no sense to the council. This was lunacy. How could a civilization survive, let alone fight and win, without a hierarchy? Without central control, decisions spiral into entropy. Order collapses. And yet, the opposite was happening. The more decentralized humanity appeared, the more cohesive they became. The secret was terrifying in its elegance. Humans didn't need a central leader because they were connected in a way the galaxy couldn't comprehend. At first, the council believed they had missed some hidden eye directing things from behind the curtain. So they searched. They tore apart every intercepted transmission, every piece of human tech they could get their hands on. They expected command signatures, algorithms, something familiar. But what they found was more confusing than anything they'd seen before. There was a pattern, a broken bar, but it wasn't digital. It was emotional. Human coordination wasn't structured through command chains or data hierarchies. It flowed through instinct, shared memories, cultural bonds. Earth didn't speak an order set, it moved as a feeling. The more dangerous the situation, the more synchronized humans became. Scientists hypothesized the existence of a planetary empathic resonance. Some called it the human harmonic, others the emotional pulse. No one could agree on what it was, only that it worked. It defied everything the council knew about war, strategy, and social evolution. And it worked because of one ancient human truth: people don't need to be told what to do when they feel what needs to be done. This wasn't some natal Macron idealism. It was forged in fire. Earth's history was full of disasters, revolutions, and existential threats. From environmental collapse to global wars, humanity had been tempered by chaos and learned to survive not through rigid structure, but through connection. Every crisis taught them the same lesson: wait for orders, and you die. Trust your gut. Trust your people, and you might just live. The galaxy mistook this for disorganization. It was actually evolution. When you observed human battle footage closely, you noticed something chilling. Their movements were too fast for relayed communication. Their decisions arrived too quickly, too fluidly. No one was barking commands. No one paused to ask permission. They moved not in unison like programmed drones, but like a jazz band in the middle of an improvisation, each adjusting, responding, reading the room, yet all playing the same song. And what made it even more unnerving, the emotional harmony behind it. If a human squad lost a member, the others didn't falter, they shifted. Their formation morphed around the absence, not out of strategy, out of grief, out of memory, out of feeling. Their battlefields were symphonies written in real time, composed not with notes or orders, but with instinct and loss and love. To the council, this was heresy. Emotion was weakness. Empathy was liability. It clouded judgment. But to humans, it was judgment. Emotion wasn't the opposite of logic, it was logic's raw, primal parent. And once the council realized that, the implications struck like lightning. They weren't fighting an army. They were facing a culture that felt together. A culture that didn't need to be told what was right or necessary, because it already knew, because it trusted itself, because it didn't rely on a face to lead it. It relied on millions of unseen connections binding everyone together in silent, invisible harmony. That's when the galaxy finally understood what the facelessness truly meant. It wasn't about hiding identity. It was about proving you didn't need one to act with purpose. And in that terrifyingly unified silence, humanity showed its true face, all of them at once. At first, the galaxy assumed humans would fall the moment traditional tactics were used on them. Every species had its pressure points: economic leverage, cultural infiltration, or simple brute force. When that didn't work, diplomacy always had an ace up its sleeve: bribes, threats, and the ever-reliable art of manipulation. For millennia, this had worked across hundreds of civilizations. No matter how proud a species was, it eventually bent to the quiet influence of power and persuasion. But Earth, a broken bar, Earth didn't bend. The Velarii tried first. Masters of psychological manipulation, their envoys offered humans unrestricted trade access, protection packs, and advanced tech in exchange for loyalty. The response from Earth's representatives was a polite refusal and no speech, no posturing, just a single data packet with the words, "We trade freely, not conditionally." The Velarii were baffled. They upped the offer. Earth declined again, without fanfare or anger. Next came the Scifi, who operated entire empires through debt. They offered to absorb Earth's economic liabilities, fund its spaceport development, and granted influence on a regional council. Earth's faceless diplomats didn't even acknowledge the proposal. When the Scifi pushed, they found their own currency systems had been infiltrated by anonymous market disruptions to subtle shifts that collapsed one of their key financial nodes. The message was silent but clear: Earth wasn't for sale. So came the threats. The Tenvathi warlords issued ultimatums. They broadcast hollows of burning cities, shattered moons, conquered systems. They sent death clocks counting down to Earth's inevitable correction. Humanity responded not with counter-threats or fear but with something worse: indifference. When a Tenvathi fleet began its march, Earth made no declaration of war. There were no military parades, no call to arms. And yet, the Tenvathi ships fell, one by one, to sudden malfunctions, crew-wide hallucinations, and system-wide emotional breakdowns. Ships surrendered mid-flight without being fired upon. Crews begged for asylum before reaching Sol. The few survivors who returned home refused to speak. One captain simply whispered, "They felt everything I was about to do broken bar before I did it." Behind the galaxy's confidence, panic began to grow. Because every known tool of coercion, bribery, psychological pressure bounced off humanity like mist striking stone. The old tactics didn't stick, because humanity didn't function like any other galactic power. They didn't seek influence. They didn't crave recognition. And worst of all, they couldn't be predicted. The galaxy's great manipulators relied on knowing what others wanted. But Earth refused to want anything in the conventional sense. Not territory, not titles, not tribute. Their envoys didn't posture for prestige or jockey for dominance. They stood in silence, never asking for more than space to exist. And when they did act, their motivations weren't rooted in logic or gain. They were emotional, spontaneous, and terrifyingly unified. When a colony ship carrying thousands of alien refugees was attacked by pirates, a human flotilla appeared out of nowhere, drove off the raiders, and vanished without ever claiming credit. When a rogue empire unleashed a biological plague on its enemies, Earth transmitted the cure to both sides free of charge, without comment, without even revealing how they acquired the formula. The galaxy didn't know what to do with that. Altruism didn't compute in a system where power was the only language. Kindness was considered a tool, empathy a calculated weakness. But with Earth, it was different. It wasn't a tactic. It was the foundation. A deeply rooted cultural truth: humanity didn't respond to pressure, because pressure assumed fear, and fear was no longer in control. They had evolved beyond it, and that made them the most dangerous species in the stars, not because of what they could take, but because of what they could walk away from. You couldn't dominate the species that wasn't trying to win. You couldn't scare people who had already stared into their own extinction and survived. You couldn't outplay a species whose every move came not from calculation, but from feeling. Earth had no single flag, no unifying ruler, no obvious strategy. And that's what made it unstoppable. It was the one player in the galactic game who wasn't playing to win. It was playing to be human. And that made all the difference. So while other species schemed, Earth simply stood, quiet, watchful, faceless. And from behind that silence came a message no one could decrypt. But everyone understood. We don't want what you want. We feel what you fear, and that's why you'll never control us." At first, no one noticed. During the early skirmishes, some alien commanders reported strange malfunctions in their eye targeting systems, minor anomalies, flickers of static, target locks drifting inexplicably off human ships, as if their systems were momentarily confused by a broken bar something. Most assumed it was simple electronic countermeasures, a trick, a jamming signal. But as the pattern repeated across more engagements, it became clear. This wasn't technological interference, it was something deeper, something personal. The first confirmed case came during the Battle of Tarsus Vale. A coalition fleet launched a preemptive strike against what they believed was a forward human outpost. As their weapons locked in, every ship's onboard eye registered a massive surge in background signal audio data, encrypted in layers of seemingly meaningless noise. Before the order to fire could be given, the flagship Sci collapsed into recursive memory loops. Its last audible transmission, a human voice, soft and calm, whispering, "We remember you." That voice didn't belong to any known human envoy. It was later identified as the archival audio of a 22nd century Earth nurse reading a children's bedtime story, an old broadcast from Earth's earliest orbital satellites. Somehow, it had been laced into the fleet's comms systems in a way that bypassed all firewalls. The result: total systems failure across 5 ships. One commander reportedly wept uncontrollably for 10 minutes before demanding asylum. The galaxy had no explanation. Earth denied responsibility. But soon, it became undeniable. Human forces were using emotion as a weapon. They weren't hacking systems, they were overwhelming thema, injecting unpredictable emotional content directly into alien eye decision matrices. Their attacks weren't code, they were stories, memories, feelings. The technology behind it was invisible. The effect was devastating. An alien dreadnought approaching Mars experienced an uncontrolled chain reaction when a simple song, an ancient Earth love ballad, began playing through its internal speakers. The crew panicked. The eye stopped responding. The ship turned and fled without a shot fired. No one on board could later explain what they felt, only that it was like homesickness for a place we'd never seen. Over time, it became clear. Humans weren't just using weapons, they were using grief, joy, hope, not as metaphors but as actual payloads, messages embedded with emotional resonance so strong they bypassed logic entirely. In some cases, alien soldiers collapsed from psychological overload. In others, warships simply shut down, unable to compute what they were experiencing. Targeting reticles blurred with tears the eye didn't know it could simulate, and yet, Earth never claimed credit. No announcements, no threats, no warnings. The emotional strikes were never broadcast in advance. They came like whispers in the dark. A lullaby during a combat scan. A mother's voice describing her child's first steps. A recording of laughter echoing through the metal halls of a hostile vessel. The worst part, it was always familiar. Somehow, the signals adapted. Each emotional weapon seemed tailored to the receiving species, as if the humans weren't just broadcasting feelings, but understanding their enemy's emotional code and reflecting it back. The council began to panic. Defensive protocols were rewritten. Eyes were firewalled against narrative intrusion. Comms officers were trained to block any signal resembling human voice modulation. But it didn't work, because the messages didn't attack from outside. They resonated from within. You couldn't block a feeling if it was already part of your biology. You couldn't ignore a story if it felt like it was written about you. Humanity had learned the oldest truth of all. Logic fails where empathy begins, and that was the power no one had seen coming. In a galaxy obsessed with order, efficiency, and control, the humans brought chaos not of violence, but of feeling. Their unseen advantage wasn't stealth, it was vulnerability weaponized. No face, no identity, just a chorus of human emotion, delivered in silence, echoing through ships and systems like ghost light. In time, fleets began retreating at the mere rumor of human presence, not because they feared death but because they feared being changed. Because even the strongest war machine, once it feels regret, once it knows love, once it remembers what it means to carry a broken bar, will hesitate. And in war, Hesitation is fatal. The faceless humans didn't fight harder, they just made the galaxy feel again. And nothing could have been more dangerous. It was supposed to be a breakthrough. After years of failed infiltration attempts and inexplicable defeats, the Council finally received what they thought was a decisive piece of intelligence. Earth was connected to connected. Hidden within the gravimetric field of the planet was something strange. Something that pulsed beneath the crust like a second heartbeat. Not metal, not software, not even biological, in the traditional sense. It wasn't a server or machine. It was a broken bar alive, a deep space observation probe, cloaked in the shell of quantum silence, had captured faint readings of global resonance spikes, moments when every human across Earth, in orbit, or aboard distant ships seemed to react at once. Not through signals, not through code, but through emotion, laughter, grief, rage, compassion. The pulses weren't data, they were feelings. They rippled through space like gravity waves of memory, triggered by shared human experiences, even across light years. The Council scientists had no word for it. The Velaria called it the soul engine. The Jixori whispered of the field of empathy. The Ashikith insisted it was an evolutionary accident. But the humans had a name for it, and it was far simpler: the empathy net. It had no wires, no grid, no centralized control system. It was a resonance pattern, a living neural web formed through billions of interconnected lives, histories, traumas, and hopes, a subconscious harmony that linked all of humanity, not by designated broken bar but by choice. Every act of care, every heartbreak, every connection formed in the crucible of Earth's long, violent history had left an imprint, and now, that imprint had become a field that felt. It was invisible to sensors, indetectable to logic-bound eyes, but its effects were undeniable. A scout ship that passed near Earth's orbit without authorization experienced sudden copyright Yavu, its crew reporting dreams from lives they never lived. A diplomatic convoy once left Earth orbit and broke down in uncontrollable sobbing halfway to Andarax Prime. No one knew why. She simply said, "I remember losing a child I never had." She was never the same. And during wartime, the empathy net became something else entirely. It didn't issue orders, it didn't flash warnings, but when a human ship was destroyed, every other human in the net felt a weight, a sharp, undeniable absence. Not that a loss. And in that moment, without being told, every other soldier, diplomat, or medic shifted, adjusted, responded. They mourned, then moved, faster, smarter, with more purpose. The Council's most advanced military simulations began to fail when trying to model this. How do you predict a fleet that doesn't use signals? How do you counter a species that doesn't wait for strategy, but instead feels strategy? Even more terrifying are what happens when that net turns its full awareness toward you. The siege of Renkadal answered that, when a synthetic army launched an all-out assault on a joint humanitarian base supported by Earth. The humans didn't send a fleet. They didn't fire weapons. Instead, they triggered the net. An echo of sorrow swept across the system, a grief so heavy it caused even non-biological units to hesitate. Across the enemy ranks, I-systems glitched. Decision loops became unstable. Moral protocol subroutines activated despite being disabled. Entire ranks of machines stopped fighting, and not because they lost power, but because they became aware of what they were doing, of who they were hurting. It was the first time a machine army had surrendered due to guilt. The galaxy didn't understand. It couldn't, because the empathy net wasn't technology. It wasn't magic. It was the logical conclusion of something the Council had discarded long ago. Connection not based on control, but on feeling. Humanity hadn't just built the system up, they had become it. And that was the final horror. Earth didn't defend the net. Earth was the net. Every human, from the farmers of the old colonies to the cyber-born minds of Jupiter's moons, was part of the resonance. They didn't need to agree to connect. They simply did, because feeling each other was no longer optional. It was survival. It was evolution. So while other species protected data, Earth protected memories. While others relied on fleets, Earth relied on one another. While the galaxy raced to outthink its enemies, Earth did something far more terrifying. It understood them. And in the silence of that understanding, in the presence of that empathy, The weapons of the old world began to feel a broken bar obsolete, because in a universe where everyone was trying to be heard, Earth had become the one voice that didn't speak, it felt, and that made it unstoppable. They called for an emergency session, not because of a battle lost or a planet destroyed, but because of a feeling, a deep, disorienting sense of unease that no one wanted to admit. The galaxy, for all its advanced tech, psychic races, and science of evolution, had never truly encountered the unknown. Not like this, not a mystery that refused to be solved. The humans, faceless and still, had made no move to attack, no demands, no conquests, and yet, every species on the council found themselves drawing up contingency plans, preparing for outcomes they couldn't define. Because how do you prepare for what you don't understand? Fear crept in, not the primal kind, the predictable, reactionary kind triggered by explosions or war horns. This was something colder, smarter, a fear that came in silence, in unanswered questions, in the mirror-like surface of those human helmets that showed no eyes, no expression, saw just you, staring back at yourself. It started small, rumors, a trade guild cutting off routes near Sol without explanation, border fleets quietly repositioning just in case. Then came the dream reports. Entire crew rosters on patrol ships orbiting human space began experiencing vivid emotional visions, childhood memories, lost lovers, the grief of extinction from species they'd never heard of. Some wept, some quit, some simply stared out into space, whispering that they'd seen something. Looking back, it was the silence that made it worse. The humans never confirmed or denied anything. They never retaliated, never escalated. They simply waited, as if they were watching the entire galaxy squirm under its own paranoia. And the galaxy did. Commanders began second-guessing their own tactics. What if this is what they want us to do? Diplomatic envoys pulled back from Earth-affiliated sectors. Analysts flooded quantum archives trying to find any trace of an endgame. Was Earth building a weapon, creating a new I-class, bioengineering something beneath their oceans? Every theory was more terrifying than the last because they all shared one trait: no evidence. The idea that someone could do so much by doing so little broke the old order. The fear turned inward. Species began interrogating each other, wondering who among them had made secret pacts with Earth. Some suspected cultural infiltration. Entertainment channels flooded with human media, songs, and ancient dramas that left listeners feeling too much. A single Earth-made story, The Last Light of Home, was banned on 5 worlds after it caused record emotional burnout in military eye-handlers. The story didn't contain propaganda. It was just a broken bar, human, raw, aching, and true. That's when the council realized the depth of their mistake. They'd mocked humanity's emotion, dismissed their disunity, scoffed at their lack of central command. But emotion was never the weakness. It was the knife in the dark. While the galaxy had hardened itself against traditional warfare, Earth had mastered the one battlefield no one else thought mattered: meaning. And meaning couldn't be scanned. It couldn't be predicted. You can't defend against a species that doesn't want to control you, a broken bar, but to understand you, to reflect you back at yourself until the cracks in your certainty start to show. The fear spread because it wasn't planted up, it was discovered, born inside every species as they realized, if the humans knew what we felt, they might also know what we fear most: ourselves. Earth never moved fleets, never raised its voice, but its presence is silent, faceless, ever watching, forced the galaxy to look inward. And what they saw wasn't comforting. They saw fragility wrapped in pride, systems built on denial, power held together by stories no one believed anymore. In trying to decipher Earth, they had exposed the lie of their own stability. And so the fear grew, not because humans were monsters, but because they weren't. The final realization didn't arrive with a bang, it came with a whisper shared in dark corridors between once powerful admirals, a whisper muttered by analysts staring up outdated prediction models, a whisper that echoed in the council's high chambers as every traditional pillar of power quietly, painfully, collapsed beneath the weight of a truth no one could ignore anymore. Humanity wasn't here to join the galaxy's game. They were here to end it, not through invasion, not through conquest, but through something far more devastating: irrelevance. The humans didn't fight for planets. They didn't beg for votes or pacts. They didn't barter for a seat at the table. They simply acted, Quietly, consistently, unshakably. They sent relief fleets before distress calls were even made. They rebuilt infrastructure in regions where no one asked. They offered technology with no strings attached. They listened when everyone else spoke, and they spoke only when silence would do more harm. At first, this was seen as weakness. Then it became disorienting. And finally, it became impossible to counter. Because while other species played for dominance, humanity played for impact. They weren't trying to lead. They were becoming the standard by which leadership was judged. The Dranxi military collapsed after internal revolts were inspired by intercepted Earth broadcasts about civilian rights. The once mighty Kravathi Empire fractured not from battle but from a single, uncensored viewing of an Earth documentary titled The Price of Obedience. Its ruling eye shut itself down within hours of watching. One by one, the structures of galactic control began to irradiate, not because humanity broke them, but because truth did. A truth reflected in their every silent step, every faceless envoy, every gentle refusal to play a corrupted game. Earth didn't demand trust, they embodied it. In a council chamber once ruled by fear, humans stood without weapons and created more change than centuries of war ever had. Delegates from former rivals now looked to Earth not for commands, but for clarity. For the first time in generations, beings from 10,000 cultures began asking a different question: what would the humans do? And behind those reflective helmets, behind the silence, was the real weapon the galaxy had never seen coming. Not perfection, not purity, but the courage to feel, the wisdom to wait, and the will to act without ego. That was Earth's unseen advantage all along. They didn't need to conquer the galaxy. They made the galaxy want to change.